He fought his way up from nowhere. He bled for this team on special teams for 12 years. And now, just like that, he's walking away forever. If you live and breathe Dallas Cowboys football, this is the channel for you, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now before we dive in. Because what we're about to talk about today isn't just a roster move. It's the end of an era for one of the toughest, most unheralded warriors this franchise has had in over a decade. And right behind it, there's a second storyline brewing that could mean the Cowboys are about to blow up an entire phase of their team. So buckle up, because today we're covering both the heartbreak and the headache hitting the Cowboys' third phase of the game. Let's start with the heartbreak. Ask yourself this: how many players do you know who clawed their way onto an NFL roster with absolutely nothing handed to them, then spent over a decade making themselves indispensable through pure grit? Not many. And that's exactly the story we're saying goodbye to today. C.J. Goodwin is hanging up his cleats. 12 seasons in the NFL. 8 of them right here in Dallas. And for any of you who've followed this team closely, you know this isn't just a guy who showed up and collected a paycheck. This is a guy who completely redefined what it means to be a special teams difference maker in the modern NFL. Goodwin made the announcement over the weekend at his own charity sports camp, an event he's hosted for nearly a decade now to give back to kids in his community. And in the middle of that celebration, surrounded by the next generation, he quietly closed the book on his own playing career. There's something poetic about that, honestly, a guy who spent his whole career uplifting everyone around him, choosing to step away while doing exactly that. Let's talk about what this man actually means to the Dallas Cowboys organization, because the numbers alone don't do him justice. At 36 years old, Goodwin suited up for 108 games in a Cowboys uniform. That's the second longest active tenure on the entire roster, trailing only Dak Prescott, who joined the team 2 years before him. Think about that for a second. Through coaching changes, coordinator turnovers, playoff heartbreaks, roster overhauls, Goodwin was a constant. While quarterbacks, coordinators, and front office voices came and went, this special teams gunner just kept showing up, kept producing, and kept being one of the most respected voices in that locker room. And he did this all without ever hearing his name called in the draft. Goodwin went undrafted back in 2014, and from that moment forward he played every single snap of his career with something to prove. Here's a story that a lot of casual fans don't even know. His path into the league traces back to a connection with Hall of Fame defensive back Mel Blount. Goodwin had worked for Blount as a farmhand, and Blount's son had actually gone to high school with him. When Blount saw what kind of player and what kind of person Goodwin was, he personally pushed for him to get a shot. That's how Goodwin landed a tryout in the league in the first place. It's wild when you think about it. One connection, one Hall of Famer willing to vouch for a kid working on his farm, and that turned into a 12-year NFL career. Sometimes it really is about who believes in you when nobody else will. From there, Goodwin bounced around the league like so many undrafted hopefuls do. He had stints with the Falcons, the Cardinals, the Giants, the 49ers, and the Bengals, short opportunities, practice squad stints, nothing that stuck. But in 2018, the Cowboys plucked him off Cincinnati's practice squad, and that decision ended up being one of the most underrated roster moves of that entire era. Because once Goodwin put on that star, he never looked back. Over his 8 seasons in Dallas, Goodwin logged more than 2,200 special teams snaps, primarily working as a gunner on the punt coverage unit, arguably the most physically demanding, least glamorous job on the entire football field. If you've ever watched a punt team in slow motion, you know what a gunner does. He sprints down the field at full speed, getting double-teamed and mauled by blockers the entire way, all so he can be the first man down the field to make a tackle. It's a thankless job. It's a brutal job. And Goodwin made it look like art. He racked up 69 tackles in a Cowboys uniform, 9th in franchise history, and 87 across his full NFL career. In 2021, he became the first player in franchise history to lead the team in special teams tackles for 3 consecutive seasons. That's not luck. That's not a guy riding a hot streak. That's sustained excellence at an incredibly demanding job, year after year, well into his 30s. And here's the thing that should really stick with you: Goodwin wasn't just productive himself. He made everyone around him better. He became a team captain in 2025, standing alongside names like Dak Prescott, Brandon Aubrey, and Donovan Wilson. That's elite company for a guy who entered the league with zero fanfare and zero guarantees. His own special teams coordinator, Nick Sorensen, didn't hold back when talking about what made Goodwin special. According to Patrick Walker of Dallas Cowboys. Sorensen praised how Goodwin took care of his body to extend his career, how he led by example even as he aged, and how he never stopped competing, showing up and producing day after day, season after season, because that's simply what it takes to survive that long in this league. So here's that early question for you: when a player gives this much of himself to a franchise for this long, with this little glory and this much sacrifice, what do we actually owe these guys when they walk away? Because Goodwin never asked for the spotlight. He never demanded credit. He just punched the clock and made the team better every single Sunday for over a decade. Drop your favorite CJ Goodwin memory in the comments below. Whether it was a bone-jarring special teams tackle, a moment on the sideline, or just appreciating the consistency, let's give this guy the send-off he deserves. Now here's where things get complicated for Dallas. Because losing Goodwin doesn't just mean losing a name on the roster. It means losing the heartbeat of an entire phase of the team. And the timing couldn't be more awkward, because special teams was already a problem area heading into this offseason. The most obvious name in the conversation to help fill that void is newly signed safety P.J. Locke. Locke spent 6 seasons with the Denver Broncos, building a reputation as a core special teams player before eventually carving out a larger defensive role. He's no stranger to grinding it out in the trenches of the third phase, and with Goodwin gone, there's a very real chance Dallas leans on him heavily in that exact same gunner role. But let's be honest, replacing a guy who led the franchise in special teams tackles for 3 straight seasons isn't something you do with one off-season addition. It's a multi-man puzzle, and Nick Sorensen, now entering his 2nd season as special teams coordinator, is going to have to find some serious answers fast. And this is where the story shifts from sentimental to downright frustrating, because Goodwin's departure exposes a coverage unit that was already shaky last season, and a lot of that traces directly back to the punt operation itself. Let's talk about Bryan Anger. Anger is 37 years old, a 2-time Pro Bowler, and currently the oldest expected starting punter in the entire NFL. He was a 3rd-round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars back in the day, with stops in Tampa and Houston across his 14-year career before landing in Dallas. On paper, that's a resume full of accolades. In reality, last season did not match the pedigree. Here's the uncomfortable truth: Dallas is paying one of the highest salaries at the punter position in the entire league, and yet the team finished just 14th in net yards per successful punt attempt, factoring in both regular season and postseason numbers. Now, 14th isn't catastrophic on its own. But when you're investing premium money into that position, average simply isn't good enough. And it wasn't just inconsistency. By multiple accounts, Anger was off target frequently, sometimes booting the ball way too deep, other times leaving way too short a punt, putting his coverage unit in tough spots over and over. Now, to be fair, this isn't entirely on the punter. Punting is a team operation. A guy can't just boom the ball wherever he wants, he has to play within the limitations of his own coverage unit, and vice versa. There's actually a football term for this dynamic: out-kicking your coverage. Too much hang time and distance gives a dangerous returner all the room in the world to make a play. Too little, and you're leaving free yardage on the table. It's a delicate balance, and last year, that balance simply wasn't there for Dallas. So here's our question of the day, and I genuinely want to know where you all stand on this one: should the Dallas Cowboys move on from Bryan Anger this offseason and bring in a younger punter to compete for the job, or is age just a number and Anger deserves one more shot to prove last year was a fluke? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this is exactly the kind of debate that's going to define training camp. Here's why this matters financially too. If the Cowboys decided to part ways with Anger, they'd stand to free up roughly $3.1 million in cap space. That's not a desperate, must-make move by any stretch. Dallas isn't strapped for cash at that position. But when you combine an underperforming, well-compensated punter with the sudden loss of your best coverage gunner in franchise history, you start to see why this entire phase of the team needs a serious off-season evaluation. And it's not just the punter and the gunner spot. Watching the tape from last season, the kick coverage units as a whole struggled to consistently win the field position battle, and field position is one of those quietly crucial elements of the game that fans often overlook until it costs you a game in November or December. A great punter who's surgical with placement can flip an entire contest. A shaky one can hand the opposing offense a short field and bury your own defense in bad situations over and over. So don't be surprised if Dallas brings in competition at punter heading into training camp this summer. With this front office already having shaken up the coaching staff and revamped major portions of the roster after missing the playoffs for a second consecutive season, it would be entirely consistent with their off-season approach to scrutinize every single position, even one as overlooked as the punter spot. It really paints a vivid picture of where this franchise stands right now. On one hand, you've got a heartfelt, well-earned goodbye to a player who embodied everything good about grinding your way to relevance in this league. On the other, you've got a front office that knows it cannot afford to be sentimental about performance, even at a position most fans rarely think twice about. Special teams football doesn't make highlight reels very often, but it absolutely decides games, and the Cowboys know that better than anyone after years of close losses that came down to a handful of plays. So as we head toward training camp, keep your eyes on a few things. Watch to see whether Sorensen leans on P.J. Locke or another roster addition to fill Goodwin's exact role as the team's premier gunner. Watch whether Dallas actually brings in outside competition at punter, or whether they choose to run it back with Anger for one more prove-it season. And most importantly, watch how this team handles the symbolic transition from an era defined by undrafted grinders like Goodwin into whatever comes next for this organization. One thing is certain, this franchise just lost a piece of its soul on special teams. C.J. Goodwin earned every bit of respect this fanbase can give him, and whatever comes next in his life after football, he leaves Dallas having given absolutely everything he had to that star on the helmet. That's it for today's breakdown. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our continued coverage of the Cowboys heading into training camp, because between roster battles, coaching adjustments, and now a wide-open competition at punter, this is shaping up to be one of the most consequential off-seasons this team has had in years. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.